welcome to TUC0's Talks. TUC0's Talks is a leadership podcast where we talk to military leaders and to athletic coaches to try to figure out how do we take care of people and how do we learn and fail forward. Well, I do want to thank Moray Classical Schools for partnering with us. Moray Classical Schools is a private Christian classical school specifically tailored for military kids. If you do not know about Moray Classical Schools, I highly recommend you go to morayclassical.org and learn more about them. So today we have the honor of talking to retired Major General Mark Dillon. General Dillon had an amazing military career, and now outside of the military, he has worked with some incredible institutions such as Hillsdale College and a couple of classical schools. Well, we're going to talk to him today about what is leadership, and he's going to share some amazing things. And some of the qualities he talks about is to observe, to read, and to think. Well, make sure that you like and subscribe and get ready to check in with TUC0's Talks. Hello and welcome to TUC0's Talks. I am excited for another day. Today we have retired Major General Mark Dillon. How are you doing, sir?
Hey, Chris, I'm doing great. Thanks for asking.
Well, today's going to be a fun lesson where we can just sort of sit down and talk about leadership and really talk to the young leaders about what they should be doing. And where should they be going and what should they be doing? And we have an expert today who has had an incredible military career and then a career outside the military. So, sir, why don't you just take a couple of seconds and let everybody know who you are and where you're from?
You bet, Chris. Again, thanks to you for the opportunity. It's an honor to be invited as part of TUC0 Talks. Hopefully have a little bit of a sage advice to pass on. A lot of skin, knees, and scar tissue over the years. By way of background, 33 years in the United States Air Force, retired back in 2017. My last assignment was a deputy commander at Pacific Air Forces in U.S. Indo-PACOM. Along the way, flew airplanes, staff tours, all kinds of great stuff. I've been retired for a few years now, working in the private sector. Had an opportunity to, I've done a little bit of work with folks that you're familiar with at Hillsdale College and their K-12 program. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that later. And I'm Gene and Darlene's son. I'm Sarah's husband, and I'm Charlie, Jack, and Luke's dad. So those are the proudest duty titles I've ever worn, and just really appreciate the opportunity to augment the great work that you're doing, streamlining education for our military families and just helping folks out with leadership lessons. So thank you again for the opportunity, Chris.
Absolutely. And so the way this whole thing started was I kept getting a lot of lieutenants hitting me up with emails, and they're the ones that were in the schoolhouse. Sure. And they were like, "Hey, sir, I have a question." Because I told them all the time, like, I am forever that person you call and can ask the stupid questions that you get no judgment. And so send those questions to me where we go. So I kept getting those. And then finally, a couple of them were like, "You need to do a podcast." And so I didn't know what a podcast was, but I was like, okay, well, we'll do that and we'll have a lot of fun with it. And when I was developing that, I started thinking through, who are these experts that I need to bring on? And your name was on the list. So I had an original 10 people that I wanted to call, and yours was there. And it really was, one, an exceptional military career. You bring in a deputy JFAC and you've got a lot of knowledge there. But it was your time with Hillsdale College and your time advising education that I was like, all right, now we're talking. Now I know, hey, I'm going to get a great critical thinker. I'm going to get someone who can bring in the knowledge, someone that I know has the same values and virtues that we need to be infusing into these young leaders. So I'm excited for this. I think it's going to be a great time. And we'll just start off with, we've got all these young leaders who may or may not have had some great leadership training. When they're jumping in or about to jump into their first leadership position, what should they be learning?
Sure. Hey, Chris, great question. There's no right answer. I try to keep things simple, so I'll make three suggestions or three pieces of advice I have for young leaders. One of the things is just observe. The second thing is read, and the third thing is think. And I'll expand a little bit on each one of those. Maybe share a couple of vignettes that I have. A lot of times we think on the observe topic, there's a lot of opportunities in our everyday lives that are leaders that are around us, our parents, our teachers, coaches that we have in school or perhaps at work or in the military, various leaders. Vast majority of them are not famous. And unfortunately, in today's environment, a lot of folks try to take advice from famous people. And, that's okay if it's metered, but, there's an old saying out there that the famous are rarely significant. And the significant are rarely famous. And so an example of things, leadership lessons I learned came from my dad. God rest his soul. He's passed on 10 years ago. But a man with an 8th grade education joined the from a family of 11 from middle America, joined the United States Navy back in the 1950s, served his country honorably, Vietnam War, 20 years, retired. Went on to multiple careers afterwards, married my mom, raised 3 kids, moved around a lot, but settled in northern Minnesota, bought a farm, ran a business, coached middle school baseball for many years. And I just learned a lot of lessons by watching my dad. Not when I was younger, I thought my parents didn't know anything, of course, like a young kid, but over time I realized how much they knew. He taught me about hard work, growing up on a farm, being responsible, showing up on time, going to church every week, all those virtues that I took for granted at the time, but realize how important they are and they're, around the family and the community. But, I'm biased because he was my dad, Gene Dillon, but others validated how valuable his leadership lessons were. When he passed on a couple of years afterwards, the local school board, because my dad was part of the school board for 25 years, in addition to all the other things he was doing, they named a brand new school after him. So a real true testament to a leader who had impact in our family and in the local community. Again, a guy with an 8th grade education. So it wasn't about his academic prowess. It was about his leadership skills in the community. Remember the great baseball player and philosopher Yogi Berra once said that you can observe a lot by watching, just by watching. So my dad's a perfect example of observation and taking advantage of that. The second thing was I would encourage folks to do is to read. Now, there's just an infinite amount of material you can read out there. What are you going to read? Taylor Swift's latest post on X, or Instagram feeds, or TikTok, or those type of things, or Newsweek, some of the more traditional periodicals. I caution young leaders to go a different venue, a different path. And this, Chris, in the work that you're doing now, not only with your distinguished military career, but now that you're taken on as the executive director of Morea Classical Schools and the work you're doing there to try to help our military families. So the answer, from reading is what to read. Read the classics. Classics of Western civilization. They've been around for, millennia, and they've served Western civilization well, and I would to go there. And so, this. I can offer a couple of books, and so I'll share a little bit about what to read. There's one of the books I'll offer to read is this book. It's called Warrior Politics by Robert Kaplan. Came out about 20 years ago or so. And it has an interesting title, Why Leadership Demands a Pagan Ethos. And so he has a bunch of quotes in that book. And one of the quotes that I love is, I'm going to read over here. Here's one that talks about all of us every year, every generation. He says, like previous generations, we believe in our singularity, that our times are unique, and that we are wiser and more enlightened than those who preceded us. And that's a gentle reminder from Mr. Kaplan that that's not necessarily the case. Every generation has wisdom and knowledge to pass on. So read the classics. Thomas Sowell, he's a famous economist and a philosopher, political commentator. You know, he talks about how Americans are smart, they're educated, but they're ignorant because all the stuff that they're reading, it's just not that good. You know, it's okay. It's interesting. It's like candy. If you eat candy all day, every day, you know, you'd be full-time at the dentist. So reading what you read is important. Don't take my advice for it. Again, across time, Thucydides back in the 5th century, that's what he talked about. The events which have happened in the past will at some time or other, and in much the same way, be repeated in the future. Confucius, complete continent away from in the same time period, Confucius said, being fond of the truth, I'm an admirer of antiquity. And so again, the focus on looking across time, reading the classics, reading the great books. You know, there's just a whole host of ideas out there. Probably the best, easiest one that's captured. Harry Truman said, if you want a new idea, read an old book. So I'd encourage your young leaders to read and read the classics. And, you know, I'm not classically trained. I wish I was. I wish I had a traditional education like you're trying to provide military families, you know, at Maria Classical Schools. But I do in my spare time try to read some of the great books. And finally, thinking. We take it for granted spending time to think, but I learned a tremendous lesson from a senior military leader when I was the deputy chief of staff, U.S. forces in Korea, about spending and taking time to think. Brand new commander, 4-star, very significant position in our military, very significant responsibilities. He wore 3 particular hats: U.S. Forces Korea, Combined Forces Command with the Republic of Korea, and then a United Nations Command. Wickedly complex job. And the boss, after 2 weeks coming on board, told me, he said, hey, Chief, I need you to declutter my schedule to give me time to read and think. And that's counterintuitive to what we think about senior military leaders and C-suite leaders in corporate America, about being incredibly, you know, you're only if you're busy and your day is full, 20 hours a day, are you accomplishing. That's not the case.
Right.
He had a lot of white space on his calendar intentionally, and we created it for him. And I would argue he was a very effective leader, went on to become the Supreme Allied Commander of the U.S. European Command. So observe, read, and think, I think, are the 3 keys for young men and women in aspirational leaders and current leaders that will help them do a better job in leading young men and women.
Man, that's awesome. I mean, we could be done right there. I just sitting and thinking about those things.
Yes.
My gosh. You know, the observe thing to me is so big. You know, it just being able to sit and watch and listen, and how listening is part of observing, and just getting into that. Obviously, the reading, I love that. The classics books, Amore, it's really fun. So my kids are going to a school that is not classical right now, but is embedded with the classics. And Excellent. So we sit down and have about 30-minute discussion, and they get to ask me whatever they want. And so having someone to discuss the classics with is so critical and such a big deal, just to try to understand the complexities of life. And they're reading To Kill a Mockingbird right now, and they're just sort of like, I don't know what's happening. This is so foreign of a concept to me. How do I think through things? And the classics are great. And, you know, when I sit and listen to, and I love Simon Sinek. He's fabulous.
Oh, Simon's terrific.
But he's fabulous because he's trained in education and in reading. Like, he doesn't come up with new concepts. He grabs the old concepts and puts them in a new twist. And you're sort of like, oh, I never thought of that. And that's why he's so good. And man, you talked about your dad. And, you know, I think of my pawpaw, and he just not a big academic, didn't go far in school, but he loved people and he could lead. And, I think when you talked about they named a school after him and he had an 8th grade education.
Correct.
Like it's not about how smart you are. It's about sitting down and the fact of clearing your schedule and be able to think and having time to think. And, Dr. Parent, Christopher Parent, always talks about having schola and that time to sit and to think and ruminate and go over what you've been reading and going over and processing information. We're so busy, and I've been guilty of it. I mean, you're in command. You've got a million things going on. You know what I never did, though? I need help clearing out my schedule. I wish I would have done that. That's brilliant. That's a smart move.
Many years without doing that as well. And that's one thing I learned from a senior military leader was, hey, it's okay to have white space on your calendar to allow you time during the duty day to think. And it's vitally important. It's part of that whole person concept, the physical, the spiritual, the emotional, and you need time, your brain. It's an amazing blessing the good Lord's given us. And if you just bombard it with information, it's overload. But it's a powerful tool when you allow it to do what it was designed to do. I think it's a critical part of that.
And I'm just processing information. The opposite of thinking is scrolling. And how many times do we just go through Instagram or I don't do Facebook, but I'm sure people do Facebook, and I'm just guilty going through LinkedIn and going through and mindlessly reading what's going on in the world and what would it be like if I put down my phone and said, you know what, I'm just going to scroll through my day and what could I have done? What a drastic divergence we are right now in thinking and scrolling. All right. So we talk about Moray Classical School and just obviously what a great opportunity to be trained in the classics, but where we are is where we are. Sometimes we can't go back and relearn those types of things. But what should we be learning now? Like there's got to be things out there that we can work on, professional development and other things. What do you recommend to these young leaders on what they should be doing for those programs?
Yeah. Great question. Loaded question. Millions of answers. I'm not going to say anything earth-shattering, but I will share what's worked for me and what continues to work for me, professional development. And it's focused a lot on what others have written and what others on the reading aspect of it, but also on some podcasts. I would encourage for professional development and for to study human nature. For leaders, by default you get at least a master's and probably a PhD in human nature by leading young men and women and the vital mission of our military. One of the things that I encourage folks to go to for professional development is the Bible. Read the Bible.
All right.
There's millennia of human interest and human failures and human success stories contained in the Bible.
So true.
Victor Davis Hanson has a great book for leadership lessons. It's called Carnage and Culture. Yeah, it's about a 20-year-old book. Talks about great battles of landmark battles and the rise of Western power. And so he's obviously classically trained and a great source of information. The Warrior Politics book that I mentioned earlier, reading on the Bible. I also like to listen to a podcast, and by listening to this podcast, I was able to accomplish one of the lessons in life, those bucket lists, and that was actually read through the Bible. And so Father Mike Schmidt has the Bible in a year. And so oftentimes when I'm out doing, whether it's working out or have free time or want to have an opportunity to listen to a podcast, I'll listen to that. So The Bible, there's some great materials out there for reading the Bible, self-help tools and books, etc. The book that I prefer, or the one that most recently come out, was Dennis Prager's Rational Bible. And he takes the first 5 books of the Old Testament and just walks you through that intellectually, and talk about critical thinking. Because again, you're looking across, all of humanity, if you will, the last 3,000-4,000 years, and all the things that human beings have done to each other, good. Yeah, I would encourage us to spend some time there in those particular books, and a couple of those podcasts are where I think there's an incredible amount of professional development that's available for young leaders. Non-traditional, intentionally so, but it's whether it's the Bible or perhaps reading about the classics, again, like Carnage and Culture book, but some incredible lessons there. And it just gets you on this roll. That's what I found, is it gets you on a roll to seek more. When you're critically thinking, and you read about a particular individual or a time in history that much about, you want to go and continue to read more. So you're just on this perpetual endeavor. One last podcast I forgot to mention. I've thoroughly enjoyed it for about the last 10 years, and that's the Hillsdale Dialogues.
Mm-hmm.
That's the weekly dialogue where Dr. Arnn and the radio host Hugh Hewitt, and they have just walked through history. There's hundreds of them, but I started listening, I want to say back in 2015. Again, just professional development, human nature, history, you name it. The entire Western tradition is there, and other cultures as well. And it's just fascinating, whether it's, Dante's Inferno or Divine Comedy, or, and you're talking to a guy who was a math major and engineer in college, but now when you're reading the classics, and, whether it's military history, Machiavellian, what folks mean by that, you can learn that just by listening to those podcasts. So some books, some podcasts I'd recommend, but professional development, don't need no certification required, no special training, no fee, they're free.
Yeah.
So if you create that time to think, I would offer those are some great sources to go to for your personal as well as your professional development.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. And you totally threw me with the Bible. I was not thinking that was where we were going to go.
Part of critical thinking sometimes is to kind of sift through it all and just to figure out, holy smokes, I didn't realize it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That one's been out there for millennia. Yeah. Yeah.
It is so good. And I look to the Bible in so many different times. And I try to find those people that I associate myself with. And interestingly enough, I find myself more aligned with people with major failures in life.
Oh, absolutely.
Like David,
yes.
And Paul. And I'm just sort of like the redemptive qualities, and it's okay to make mistakes and failing forward. And, those are so, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I would offer that is, that's aligned with humility.
When
you begin any endeavor, just a healthy dose of humility. Realize we're flawed. We're all flawed individuals, and we need help. We need divine intervention to help us out. We need something outside ourselves to be that guy. It's not a particular religion. I happen to be Catholic, but any of the great faith traditions, our being needs something outside our give us guidance, because we are fallen. We do some pretty evil things over time, and that's most unfortunate. The history books are replete with that. Absolutely. So
as you were going through, a thought got to me.
Sure.
Your professional development, don't let me put words in your mouth. Change me if my vision is wrong on this. But it seems to be about taking the eye off yourself and putting it on others. whether it's the Bible, whether it's psychology, whether it's history, and focusing in on others. Is that accurate?
That is true. As I mentioned earlier, a healthy dose of humility, realizing, we are privileged to be in certain positions. We're privileged to live in the country we live, in the time we live, and a healthy dose of humility to realize we had little or nothing to do with that. And the higher up we rise, the more you realize that there's scores, dozens, hundreds of individuals helping to make that particular organization that you're a part of successful. And I believe it's empowering. Again, I'm not a psychology major, but I believe it's empowering to individuals to put them in roles of responsibility and make them feel part of the team. There's no right solution, no one solution to do it, but I found that very effective over the years, both in the public and private sector.
Yeah. Well, we talk about psychology, and obviously my mind goes to Dr. Peterson and the things he's doing. And one of the things that I love about his podcast and about his work is he constantly talks about speaking truth and never lie, and just being able to put it out there, whatever is right, and to be able to speak it. And so I just want to acknowledge you are one person I look to. I see some things on LinkedIn and others where the conversations are tough conversations, but you're never afraid to go out there and to put them out there. And I appreciate that. And I think leaders can learn a lot from just listening to you and setting the example of what to do out there and being able to work that through. So thank you for what you do, Chris, on that.
You're very kind.
Okay, so we're gonna switch here.
Okay. All right.
What are you learning now? What is it that you're learning?
Yeah, a couple things come to mind. Like I mentioned earlier, every day, my mom is still with us. My mom, we had the opportunity to fly back and the privilege to celebrate her 90th birthday with her in northern Minnesota a couple of weeks ago.
Awesome.
And, so what am I learning now? I continue to learn every day because I try to call my mom just about every day to talk with her, thanks to the modern technology and FaceTime. I think we've got it figured out between the two of us, but I've learned how wise my parents were, and they continue to be the wisdom in my parents. And I know, your listeners have, everybody has different circumstances, but whether it's your parents, your teachers, your coaches, there's just individuals in our day-to-day lives, again, not famous folks, just regular folks that, share wisdom and incredible observations with us. And it's up to us to scoop those up and to, drink them in and harvest them and learn from them. Because as you know, our elders have a lot of wisdom. And so that's one thing I continue to learn every day. And then the other thing I think is, again, somebody much wiser than I spoke this, millennia ago. I think it was Socrates that said, wisdom is knowing how little you know. And so I realize every day how little I know and how much more I need to, to learn, to listen, to look, to observe. And so those are a couple things that sort of keep me grounded. We have we're empty nesters now, but our three sons, they keep my wife and I grounded. We keep each other, my bride and I keep each other grounded. Reality check, that's a true blessing. Celebrate. We're coming up on 33 years this year, so yeah, it's been a true blessing in my life. So yeah, how much wisdom my parents have and continue to have, and how little I know. Those are kind of two things I'm learning these days.
That's fantastic.
Great material out there to go seek it, but helps kind of work.
Man, I'm telling you. All right, so there. Golly, yep, that's so good. 30. I don't want to lose the fact of 33 years. That's something Karen and I, it's a lot of work. And she does a fantastic job of just feeding into me positively, and then also the things that I need to learn to be better. Healthy, great marriage, man, that's fantastic. So, all right. So this has been amazing. I can't wait to go back and to watch this again and just to listen and to go back over it. My boys were asking, do I enjoy going back and editing and things like that? I go, yeah, because that's where I get to listen to it all the time and relearn and relearn and relearn. Yes. And so that's in my mind right now. But before this ends, I do want to give you an opportunity. Is there any final thought or anything out there that you would like to let our listeners know about?
Sure. Well, it's yeah. First and foremost, thanks to you, Chris, for the opportunity. I truly enjoy it. General Wilbur Creech, United States Air Force, back in the 1970s, he was the Tactical Air Command. He had actually the current Vice Chief of Staff, General Jim Slife, wrote a book on General Creech called Leadership. And one of the things I learned from that book was one of General Creech's leadership mantras was, the first responsibility of leadership is training the next generation of leaders. So I relish the opportunity to get in front of young men and young women, share some of the war stories, scar tissues, and skin knees that I have. So kudos to you. Kudos to you for doing this. Kudos to you for the work you're doing at Maria Classical Schools. It's going to have a huge impact on military families, and that's a different sector of the school choice continuum, and you're leading. No one else is doing that. So God bless you for doing that. So my parting thoughts, as a brother in arms, brothers and sisters in arms, is just again sort of us to think about next 2 years. 2 years from now, 2026, we'll have the opportunity. Again, you can't pick where you live in time and space, but we will have the blessing and the privilege that we Americans who live here today. We have the blessing and the privilege to celebrate the 250th birthday of our Declaration of Independence. As men and women who've served and shout out, we'd be remiss if we did, always give the utmost respect to those who've paid the ultimate sacrifice for this great nation over the last 200, coming up on 250 years. But the Declaration of Independence is it. It is the founding document of our founders. And they made some, pretty radical statements separating from the tyrannical king. And it's served us well and continues to serve us well, reflecting back on some of the great leaders over time. Winston Churchill said, the farther back you look, the farther forward you're likely to see. And so reflecting back on what our founders did 250 years ago will allow us to properly celebrate that 50th anniversary coming up here in a short 2 years. I have a quote I would love to share with you because I think it's incredibly powerful. It was made by President Coolidge at the 150th birthday of the Declaration of Independence. So if you don't mind, I'm going to share it with your audience as my parting thoughts. Calvin Coolidge, July of 1926 at the sesquicentennial of the Declaration of Independence. And I quote, "It is often inserted that the world has made a great deal of progress since 1776, that we have had new thoughts and new experiences, which have given us great advance over the people of that day, and that we may therefore very well discard their conclusions for something more modern. But that reasoning cannot be applied to this great charter. If all men are created equal, that is final. If they're endowed with inalienable rights, that is final. If governments derive their just powers from the consent of the government, or the consent of the governed, that is final. No advance, no progress can be made beyond these propositions. If anyone wishes to deny their truth or their soundness, the only direction which he can proceed historically is not forward, but backwards toward the time when there was no equality, no rights of the individual, no rule of the people. Those who wish to proceed in that direction cannot lay claim to progress. They are reactionary. They are not more modern, but more ancient than those of our revolutionary fathers." End quote. Great document. great opportunity coming up here in the next 2 years. For those of us who've had the privilege to serve this great nation, we stand on the shoulders of giants who came before us. And I just want to, leave your listeners with thanks for the opportunity. God, continue to bless the work you're doing, Chris, and you and your family, Moriah Classical Schools, and God bless the United States of America.
Man, that's awesome. That's all. That doesn't get you up in the morning getting ready to go. I don't know what it is. That's fantastic. So, well, sir, complete honor having you on. I appreciate everything that you have done and continue to do. Thank you for continuing to mentor people like myself that are following in your footsteps and definitely standing on the shoulders of giants. So that's great. Well, from General Dillon and I, thank you for listening. Appreciate it. Y'all have a great week. And this is TUC0's Wright. Check it off.